Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here this morning. We are so excited here at AMPT to be partnering with Greater Auburn Gresham Development Corporation and also the Business Affairs and Consumer Protection to be hosting these webinars for you. Today, we have Angela Munguia sharing about nonprofit succession planning, and we're so excited to get started. Just some reminders for you all. Please stay comfortable as you can. Make sure to get some water, stay hydrated, ensure that you're in as comfortable a space as possible. And you can use the reaction button if you do not feel as though you want to have your camera on with us today, but feel free to turn on your camera as well. It supports our engagement, lets us know that you're there. Also, feel free to comment as you can in the chat and raise your hand or come off of the mute so that we can hear your voice as well. Here at AMPT, Advancing Nonprofits, we are looking forward to significant and sustained investment in Chicago's Black and Latina communities. And our mission is here, so you can read it as you would like to. We're really committed to strengthening the organizational health and supporting long-term development of small nonprofit organizations here in this city. And we are prioritizing unapologetically our Black and Latina leaders in Black and Latina communities so that they can continue to serve in the ways that best support their communities. And we also want to address the inequities that are systemically impacting us all and continue to serve as a model for anti-racist systems, processes, and practices. So we want to build capacity with you. We also want to continue to amplify your work and to prioritize developmental relationships. And yes, we will definitely be giving out the slides at the end of our presentation today. And so this morning we're joined by Angela, and we only have an hour together. So I really just want to make sure to pass the mic over to you, Angela. Feel free to introduce yourself and take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Anna. Good morning, everyone. My name is Angela Munguia. I am the founding executive director of AMPT, Advancing Nonprofits. I started in my role with AMPT in June of 2020 as the sole employee, and I'm very happy and excited and proud of the work that we've done over the past 3 years. We now have a staff of 8, focusing on supporting nonprofit organizations throughout the city of Chicago, and specifically those led by Black and Latina leaders and organizations. I am originally from Pilsen, born and raised. I currently live on the Southwest side with my partner and my 2 children. I have 2 small dogs. And I've been actually working in the nonprofit sector for 20 years. I started as a young person myself, and worked my way up through, unpaid, everything from unpaid internships as a teenager, and throughout, direct program work with young people, direct program work with other folks into leadership capacity. And so I have very much been in just about every role throughout a nonprofit organization that has allowed me to really hone in on supporting AMPT through its initial startup years. And I'm very excited to be here with you all today. You go to the next one. So today we're going to be talking about succession planning. We're going to talk about how to begin the process of identifying when it's time to move on from a role. We're going to talk about how to talk about transition in a responsive way, and how to prepare for it and not always do it on a reactionary way, and then we're also going to understand just like what are the things that you need to have in order for you to transition leadership in your organization. So before we get started on the goods, let's do a little bit of reflecting here. So I want everyone to take a second to think about, when you hear the word transition, or you think about organizational transition and leadership transition, what comes up for you? Is it positive? Is it negative? Do you have a neutral disposition towards it? And are there particular experiences that you have that have led to these feelings that you have. I would love to take about 2 minutes for you all to think, and then if anyone is interested in sharing with the rest of the group, that way we have an understanding of like how we're coming to the table when we talk about what it means to transition.
Hey, this is Marcia, and I don't even need a couple of minutes. Um,
Go for it.
I have been going through this since August 24th, 2022, when a drunk driver rear-ended me.
Mm,
And they thought I was dead. I thought I was dead too, but they were able to get me. I'm here, so it worked out. But that day, I just really went into warp speed of thinking about transitioning. And that was with my family, with Impact Family Center that I started. We just turned 19. And while I was thinking about it, I think other people also saw it, and they went into the alumni just started coming back, and they just took over everything for me. Um, so it's something that we are very conscious of. Certain people are being trained to be over certain roles. The board is in place. Everybody knows, basically what the plan is. And now they basically know everything that was kind of in my head. I just started getting stuff out of my head and putting everything into Google Drive so that they could get it. Even with my personal things, I want to leave some things to Impact as well as my family. So all those kinds of things are so much in place now, because I'm still facing some battles. As much as you see me walk around, I walk around in pain because they want to do spinal surgery in 2 places. So I know the importance of that in a whole different way, because I was faced with it, and I just didn't even know what was going to happen. So I'm so happy you did. Right when I saw it, I was like, let me sign up to make sure I'm doing everything right. But yeah, that's it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I'm so glad that you made it out of that terrible car accident, it sounds like. And I'm like, we should have asked Marcia to lead this session. But thank you so much for coming, and I'm just gonna say we're not the experts, right? So if there are definitely things that you all are doing at Impact that are different than what I'm sharing, feel free to share as well. Because I think the more information that we have across of how people are doing things differently, the better equipped we become as an organization and also just as a nonprofit sector. So thank you so much for sharing. Is there anybody else that would like to share?
Yes, I'd like to share. This is Angela. I'm really excited about this. First of all, this session. I apologize because I'm having to multitask, but my other meeting is getting the short end of the stick because I'm like really interested in this concept. So the organization that I lead, it'll be January that I will have been there 20 years.
Wow.
And have been very blessed to grow this organization, to be a part of a team that has grown this organization from like $500,000 to like $6 million was our budget for this year. And I am not looking to transition right away, but I do believe that new leadership is going to be needed, right? And I've kind of already given myself a tickling stage that, hey, this is when we need to start planning on succession. I'm community based. I live 2 blocks from my office. We do housing and safety and all types of quality of life services. And so, I need to begin this conversation. I've already started the conversation with my board chair. And I've actually told him like January 2030, I'm loving my organization from a different perspective, at the latest. But sometime between now, that's 6 years, sometime between now and those 6 years, there will be some transition. And so I love this organization, and I want to leave it in a good place. And that goes with what's my feelings about it. I've been where there's been transition where it was just like evaporation gone, deuces, I'm out. And then everybody's like, what's happening? Don't want to do that. So I think that, really building up the leadership team and building up so that I could walk away, bring someone else in, and it would be totally different. Or it might look like, who knows? I mean, somebody said to me, oh, maybe you just need maybe you need to be a president or an ED, like this whole ED and president, CEO and president position. Like there's two people and one is just the face of something because people love them and they're good for the organization, and the other person is doing all the work. I never thought about that. But I'm just trying to really understand, like, what does it mean for us to what is a succession plan? What does it look like? And so yeah, I probably have more negative than positive about transitions because I just want to see a really good succession plan. Sorry to be so long-winded.
No, thank you so much for sharing. And it sounds like you're thinking about the right things as well. Would anybody else like to share? I know we had some folks join in. We're just thinking about when we think about transitions and leadership transitions, what comes up for us? Is it positive? Is it negative? Are there experiences that have led us to feel that way about a transition? Is there anyone else who would like to share? Okay, great. Well, I'll say very quickly that, as I mentioned in my introduction, I've been working within the nonprofit sector for about 20 years now. And, I think that generally speaking across, my own experience, what I've recognized is that we often don't talk about transitions openly. And it's often something that is seen as like a scary thing. We again, I'm making generalizations, but generally speaking, we think about transitions when it's happening, right? When somebody says, here's my notice, or, I need to leave the organization. And, that sometimes it's hard for people. Change is hard. Change is hard in general. And so how do we within leadership and at nonprofit organizations create spaces to make it more a part of a regular conversation, and also create planning so that when someone is transitioning, we as a nonprofit sector and as organizations move into a space of like, okay, this is what we're doing now, as opposed to what are we doing now? So thank you all for sharing. Anna, you can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So let's talk first about, I heard Marcia saying this, and I'm wondering if there's other people who are thinking about this as well. But, when do you know that you're ready to move on? I heard Marcia mention the little the tinkle of like, oh, I'm giving myself, these ideas and giving yourself a timeline, right? So I think that, and this isn't necessarily only for executive directors, right? If you are an executive director and you have a leadership team, or there are folks who you are supervising, it is also good for you to probe, not necessarily to make them answer these questions to you, but to get them to start reflecting on their own path. But, thinking about when you're ready to go. Where were you when you started? Some of us have been in our roles for just a few years. Some of us have been in our roles for many, many years. And so thinking back to when you started, what was it that you were trying to achieve? What was the personal growth that you were aiming for? And where are you now? Have you gotten to those things? Were you able to achieve the things? Is the organization in a very different place than you expected to? And really asking yourself, like, where are you in terms of your own professional growth in that space? And being honest, are you excited about the work? Are you still giving it your all? Do you feel like it's what you need? Or, are you in a place where you're managing the work that's happening, but you're not necessarily, in a growth space? Those are not bad things. I think it's very normal across many things, right? Not necessarily just our work, but across many things. We get really excited when things are brand new and we have a lot of innovation and we have a lot of ideas, and eventually, we get comfortable with it. Not a bad thing, but to Marcia's earlier point, when is it appropriate for us to think about our own leadership and whether we need to make space for new folks, whether there are growth opportunities for us that are now itching inside of us that we want to think about. And it's really important to have those conversations with ourselves in our own private space to think about, where am I? Am I looking just to see what's out there in the world, right? And it's very natural and it's very healthy to think about these things. But if we're starting to think about these things, then maybe that's an opportunity for us to start thinking thoroughly about making a real transition plan. And like I said, we can ask ourselves these questions as executive directors, but also it's important to create the space for staff to be asking themselves questions about whether or not they're feeling fulfilled in their role. And even if it means shifting roles within the organization, if your organization, has the space and the opportunity to do so. But it's important to make sure that we're always thinking about and checking in with ourselves about where we are in the work. So
Can I just add something to what you just said?
yeah.
Because,
I can't see anybody, so if anybody wants to say something, feel free to just go ahead.
It's Marsha, and I just really wasn't ready yet to have my camera open, but I'm working. But I have a young man who came to our organization when he was 15, and he was about 27, 28. When I said, man, he is so sharp, so together. He's been trained in so much. He left. I recommended him for a job because I knew it was time for him to go. And it hurt me because he was literally my right hand. But now he's on our board. But he walked away after training with us. He's now 30. To a job that pays $75,000 a year, and he had not been to college yet. So I think that we have to have some difficult conversations with people sometimes and be that mother bird that pushes that bird out of the nest because they're going to be able to soar. And he's in a different position now. He's my boss. So he gets a chance to tell me what to do. But then you also have to see when some people may be toxic for your team and figure out, the most amicable way to get them to move forward or do something else. But you just really have to decide that. And lastly, was two quick things. One is I'm leading a youth organization, and as much as I've always told them I'm 25, so I could be at least 1 year older than them, I am a woman of a certain age now, and there's some things I haven't done. I walked away from a very, very good career at the height of my career as a national network journalist, and I said, you know what? Do I need to go back and do some of the things that I didn't get to do? So that's why I'm literally training. My mini me is amazing, and she's moving forward. I have too many me's because I think it takes two people to be me, probably. But you've got to make those decisions and then be wise in the choices that you're making. And they're for the good of the organization, So I think that we should consider all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why it's important to reflect, right? And I think you make a good point, is that sometimes, especially as those of us who supervise other folks, asking ourselves these questions, creating space for folks to ask themselves those things, but also to ask ourselves that about them, right? You build relationship with folks, you build relationship with your staff. And so creating a space to be honest and to have those exact conversations, I think it's really important to say to somebody, I think you are outgrowing this organization and I want to help you find something different. Not only is that good for them professionally, but you're also showing a level of integrity within your leadership that says, I'm not going to hold you here because I need you, versus seeing you as a professional yourself, right? And it's creating space for people to have these conversations openly and not to feel bad about it, right? How many of us can say to our supervisor or have within our careers, hey, I'm looking for another job, right? And feel comfortable in saying that without having already solidified like an offer. It's very intimidating. I know for me, some of the things that have come up are fear, right? If I tell somebody that I think I'm ready to move on, am I going to upset them? Are they going to feel like I'm disloyal to the organization? Are they going to fire me in advance? Right? Those are all things that come across, because there is a power dynamic at play. But when you are the person who is saying to somebody else, hey, there's another position that I think you would be amazing at, you're asking yourself these questions about them as well. And it's really important to set the stage for that. We can. And you actually set the stage perfectly for this next slide, which is to talk about it, right? We have to normalize the idea of transitions in leadership or within organizations so that people are not afraid about it. They're not afraid to talk about the changes that they want to see or the growth that they want to experience, either within the organization. If there are positions that are opening up, we want folks to be able to say, hey, I would love that position. Or even if it's not opening up, I would love the opportunity to grow with this organization. So when there is an opportunity, I would love to be considered, right? We want folks to be able to say that, especially if there are transitions or you're thinking about transitions within your own nonprofit organization. It's always a good look to make those changes from within. You have folks who have grown with organizations, who know how the organization works. And so moving folks and investing in them and trusting in their leadership to be able to take on new positions is really important. It also helps to equip people with the resilience and knowledge of what you do in your role or what the role does, but also in that there is a sense of trust and community building within the organization. We don't want to, again, we don't want to be reactionary to a transition and make people feel like they don't know what's going on. That always creates a tough cultural moment for organizations when that happens. But instead, we need to be able to shift to start talking about transition openly, to be able to say, hey, you know what? I think in 5 years, I'm going to start transitioning out. Or, hey, what are you thinking about your own growth opportunities? So that it's an open conversation and people feel good about being able to say what it is that they need and what it is that they want. Does anybody have any reflections that they'd like to share about, whether or not having those conversations at their organization, is welcome, is open? Have you started to do that? Are people open to it? Just curious if anyone has any thoughts.
Well, I shared a little bit before about having these kind of conversations already with myself and my board president, but I have actually been having the same kind of conversations with my leadership staff.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of prepping them and ensuring them that I'm not like thinking of going anywhere right now. And I don't have I'm not looking at LinkedIn or anything. I don't want to work for another entity. I've already kind of selected a path. I'm looking at executive coaching because I really do feel, Angela, I think you are amazing. I think the support for Black and Latino leaders are super important. We don't have these great groups to go to, right, to get that kind of peer support. But I've also already been talking to my leadership team about, looking out the next few years and what we need to do so that if I transition after 5 years, then, the organization is strong. But I also love the fact of, I feel like having those kind of conversations, that helps people to feel comfortable in them having that. Because I often say in meetings, this is not the last place you're ever going to work. You're not going to retire here. Most likely you're not going to retire here, right? So.
Okay. Yeah, that's really important, because at that stage, what you're modeling is the healthiness of thinking about their future. And again, the healthiness of like thinking about what's next. Anna can share, and I'll openly say that I've been saying, hey, I'm not going to be at AMP forever, right? Like, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I started AMP by myself, as the lone employee. However, I'm not going to be at AMP forever, because I know that there are other things that I want to do. And I know that the more that I grow in my position, it opens up other curiosities about what I could potentially do. And we want to make sure that as leadership, we create the space for folks to be able to think about the same thing. You know, if I say openly as the executive director, knowing that I hold power in the organization and that, you know, ultimately everybody works for me. If I say, hey, you know, I'm not going to be at AMPed forever, and I want to create space to think about, you know, what's next for me. What are the things that I've learned? What are the curiosities that I've had? It creates space and permission for my leadership team to say the same thing for themselves, and for them to also carry on that same cadence with their staff, and creating
I also
general
think
culture. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I also just wanted to add, I think too, because I'm saying that, I'm also saying, hey, if you're interested in being the next me, let's look at what your skill set is, what you need, how you need to be supported. If you're even thinking of remotely trying to do something like this here or elsewhere, how can I help you to get those leadership skills so that you can be a strong leader, right?
Wow, y'all are really teeing me up. Go ahead for the next slide, Anna. Yes, absolutely. Which is why it's really important to invest in people at your organization. So knowing those exact things, how do people on your team want to grow? What are the areas that they want to, the areas that they want support in? Do they want to learn about fundraising? Do they want to learn about programs? Do they want to learn about administration, right? What are their long-term goals? And sometimes folks don't know that, right? It takes a lot of work, and part of, you know, supervision is not just making sure that someone is doing the work that is associated with their role, but it's also a level of coaching. This is the role that you have. What are the growth areas within that? But also, like, how are you stretching yourself? How are you thinking about your own professional development in the long term? And in your, you know, one-on-one spaces, how are you creating space for them to start thinking about that as well? Is there someone that you can identify as your successor? Or is there someone in a leadership team that they supervise that they can identify as a successor, right? Like, when we understand what our team long-term goals are for their own professional development, it is easier for us to also understand who is in a position or interested to be able to take on a role should somebody else leave. And so now we're setting the tone and we're setting a stage for understanding, if so and so leaves, there are people there who are interested in that role, either directly interested in the role, or they're interested in growing certain professional skill sets that will allow for them to grow in that role eventually, right? So we're allowing space for people to share what they want to do, to share the growth areas, so that we can identify those things. But then also, how are we as an organization creating space to actually hone in on those things? So how do we do that? Discussing professional development goals during your one-on-ones. At AMPed, we meet on a bi-weekly basis. We try to talk about professional development goals monthly. Sometimes that doesn't work, sometimes it does, right? But create a cadence that works for you and your organization, that you create space to identify goals and how you're working together to support your team in building those goals out and to achieving those goals. Does your organization provide resources for professional development? If, you know, we have someone on staff that wants to be certified in a certain area, are we putting aside the money to be able to support them through taking the training, through joining groups that allow for them to grow in that space? How are we doing that, knowing that that skill set is going to allow for them to reach the goals within the organization that we're looking at? And then, of course, finding opportunities for leadership moments. If I know that there is someone who wants my role, you know, once I decide to transition out on my staff, I'm gonna, and we've talked about it, and there's growth areas that they're working on, and we're coaching. I'm going to look for opportunities for them within the organization to test it out, right? Maybe it means that, like, there's an event that I would normally attend that I can't go to and someone else goes for me. Maybe it's leading a meeting or something within the organization. Maybe it has something to do with funders. But what are opportunities within the organization that you can share with someone else to give them kind of like a test run of some of the responsibilities that you hold in your role that they can try out, and then you can talk and coach them through, you know, future moments, so that we don't want to wait until the time and then say, okay, you're in the role, right? But how do we scaffold some of those opportunities for them so that it's not kind of a cold turkey thing? And then, of course, we're making a plan, right? So in order to be able to set somebody up, we need to understand what needs to happen. And this goes across any role, right? But we're speaking specifically as executive directors, right? So identifying your key goals and your responsibilities. What is it that you do? What are the main things that you do on a day-to-day basis, right? Sometimes what our job description says and what we do in real life are two entirely different things. Sometimes they match, sometimes there's kind of some odd things out. But this is a really important moment for us to take a step back and to identify what are those things, so that when someone else is thinking about taking your spot, how are you setting them up for success by identifying what it is that they're going to need to do, identifying the areas that they may need support on, identify the areas that they may already be really, really, really well versed at. So really being clear about what your role is, or what the role is, and what somebody else is going to need to step into. Identifying your successor. So if that is somebody, if you have had in your mind, hey, this person is a rock star, they have shown up in XYZ ways, they have grown in their leadership, I think that when I am ready to leave, this person would be a perfect person to fill my role. When you identify that person, discuss it with them. Discuss, you know, what their plans are. Discuss if that's an interest that they have, because you want to make sure that you're not saying that in your head and then you're ready to transition and you bring that to them and they say, oh, no, I am not interested in that. That is too much responsibility, or I have other plans, or I'm not ready for this, right? You want to make sure that you're on the same page so that you can start to build in, you know, those learning opportunities and get someone ready for that. You want to create a template. Your template is going to have a number of key responsibilities, projects, the timeline, who is involved in those things. If anybody here, you know, shares in a similar experience, I'm sure you have 500 different projects that you are working on at the same time, each with different groups of people, different organizations, partnerships, board members, etc. You want to make sure that you create something that shows all of the things that you're working on, what the responsibilities are for that, who are key people involved in that project, and what the timeline is on that project, so that when someone is looking at your transition, you can scaffold, hey, come to this meeting, and then I'll show up for the next 3, and then you can take it on from there, so that we're not just handing someone over a billion projects at once, but we're helping them to transition into it, and also helping ourselves kind of get out of it. It allows for them to be able to take things in bite-sized pieces, to not be overwhelmed. But also, if we're working in projects with other people, it allows them to get to know them a little bit, to build relationship, and also to build good rapport, so that when you exit, there is established sense of trust in that relationship. You also have to communicate. You have to let everyone know who's going to be affected by your transition. What does that mean? Depending on the role, it means having to talk to your board members and your executive committee, if you have one, about your transition and about your plan. Communicating with your staff about what is happening, what is the timeline, what is the project, or rather, what is the plan in place, so that everyone is aware, because everyone will be affected. Everyone is affected when somebody leaves an organization. Do you have to notify funders? Are there other external partners that you have to notify about it as well? Make sure that you're making a list out of all the people who are going to be affected, and that you are in relationship via your role, so that they're not caught off guard. Sometimes we don't have time for that. One simple templated email to all funders might be okay. One templated email to a number of partners might be okay. And that's something that you have to weigh out based on the work that you're doing. Lastly, I would say create space for people to share how they feel. Like I mentioned at the beginning, and some of you all have noted, transitions sometimes are done really well and sometimes they're not. And sometimes people have feelings. If you have been at an organization for an extended period of time, there may be a lot of feelings that come up when you share that you want to leave. Some people, you know, may need the space to be able to say, this feels scary, or I'm sad about this, or I'm excited for you. And I want to see this as an opportunity to step up in any number of ways. But we have to create spaces for people to share about that, because transitions are, you know, to some extent an emotional thing for folks. And so we want to create a healthy space for people to be able to share how they feel. Any questions or thoughts on this so far? All right. Okay. So sometimes opportunities come and we don't expect them. Especially when you are in leadership positions, sometimes people reach out and they say, hey, here's an opportunity, right? And sometimes they're opportunities that you can't pass on. What I would say is don't feel guilty about it, right? At the end of the day, our organizations and our work we hold them very, very close. We love and care about them. I love AMPed tremendously, right? But at the end of the day, this is our work. And the organizations will continue to move on. They will pivot. They will be able to work. And so, you know, ultimately, I would say, make sure that you are centering your needs and the decisions that are best for you if you need to leave your organization for a better opportunity. Negotiating a start time with a new organization that allows for you to transition out with integrity, to not burn bridges or leave the organization in a situation. So when we're in leadership positions, we can't say, hey, I'm out in 2 weeks, right? You know your organization very well. And so you know how long it's going to be able to take in order for somebody to move into your position, even within an interim role, for them to be able to transition in a way that doesn't leave them high and dry. And so by being able to negotiate a start time that allows you to be able to plan out with your team and your board, if necessary, to make sure that you're leaving the space in good hands, is incredibly important. And it also communicates to the new organization that you're moving to that you will not leave them high and dry either if another opportunity comes into play. So always make sure that you're negotiating a start time that allows for you to transition out well, and also leaves you a little bit of breathing room before you jump into something new. Communicating immediately. So if it's the executive director that's leaving or somebody else on a leadership team, know who it is that needs to be notified immediately so that the plan can be moved into place. If you need to discuss with your board so that they can step in to support your interim, that's really important. If there's someone on your leadership team, maybe then they are talking to one of their direct reports about moving up into an interim role in the immediate. It's always good to communicate so that folks have as much time as possible to be able to process, but also to be able to put the plan into place. You want to discuss what the opportunity is. You want to discuss your timeline and the draft of your plan of how you think it should go. I say draft because you're going to know best what the things are needed to fulfill the role that you serve. However, because there are other people involved, you also want to create room and space for folks to give their feedback on how best to keep it going after you leave. And so you want to start with something so that folks are not scrambling to figure it out. You want to share something and tell them why in order for them to react to it and everyone to be on the same page about what it looks like moving forward. And again, as I mentioned previously, if you have an internal candidate in mind for who can step into your role, have that discussion with them and make sure that you recommend that in your transition, so that they know that you're not only advocating for them, that you've created opportunity, but so that they can also prepare for what it is and what it means for them to take on new work as you transition out. I want to create space. I know we only had an hour, so I wanted to get through some of the slides before getting into more conversation, but I'm wondering if anybody has any questions or thoughts.
Is this the last slide you're going to present?
It is.
Okay, then my question, it wasn't particularly about this slide, but
Yeah,
it was a former slide about professional development.
sure.
And how would you manage, we want to provide professional development opportunities for folks, and we talk about it all the time. But if folks don't really follow through, we even have gotten to the point where we said, you bring us what you think would be a great professional development opportunity for you. And sometimes it's not everyone. There's some folks that bring fellowships and, executive coaching and all kinds of things. And then some folks that you just never hear from them again.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you encourage people to, how do you encourage them to want to grow professionally? You see the angst they have sometimes about where they are, and you want them to move forward, but you can't make them. It's kind of like you can, bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. What do you suggest or do in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say this is where relationship development is really, really key. Knowing that you can have, in some cases, a frank conversation with folks about that is really important. To say, hey, I see angst, right? Can we talk about that? How are you feeling about your role? How are you feeling, period, right? I think it's really important to understand, when folks are in positions, that's not the entirety of who they are, right? We are whole people. And so sometimes we need to get an understanding of the full picture to really get a clear understanding of why folks are not taking advantage of a professional development. I'll use myself as an example. At AMPed, we provide, every staff member gets an allotted budget for professional development every single year, right? I, in 3 years, have not used very much of that budget. Why? It's not that I don't want to grow in my role. There are many things that I can identify that I'm like, oh, I really want to get better at this. However, I work likely more than 40 hours every week.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 small children at home. I sit on a board, and then I'm sure and then I like to sleep, occasionally. And so sometimes it's a matter of having to figure out, like, when, do I have time for this? As a supervisor, it's a conversation that I've had to have as well. Hey, you have not taken advantage of your professional development budget. What's up with that? Are you considering things, right? What are the areas that you're considering growing in? And then sometimes folks just don't have the time to find the stuff, right? I
Mm-hmm.
sometimes will say to folks, okay, what is it that you want to do? What are you looking at? What are the questions right now that are kind of like spinning in your head around your work? I don't know. I haven't figured it out, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let me help you find opportunities, right? Because sometimes folks don't know what to do. And then therefore you get stuck. I get stuck sometimes where I'm like, I don't know where to begin. And so I'm getting stuck. And so let me move on to this budget. Let me move on to this other thing. And so the things that I would say are, one, like, making sure to create space to have those conversations and to be honest and open with folks about that. Hey, there's opportunities and resources available to you that you haven't taken advantage of. Can we talk about that? And then second, sometimes it's going to require you to have to, like, do some of that research. Do the research because maybe they don't have the time to do so. Maybe you're privy because you've been in your role for a lot longer. You're privy to like opportunities and resources that they might not know about in the immediate. And so it's not as easy for them to find them. But then when you support somebody in finding resources and opportunities, you're also saying, I'm invested in you. I'm invested in you. So I'm taking my time to find opportunities for you, even if you don't have the time to find them yourself. And then sometimes you're going to need to work with that person. If in fact it is about a time thing, sometimes you're right. You cannot force somebody, but you can exhaust your options. You can say, hey, here's an opportunity I think would be really great for you. It requires X amount of time. Can we talk about your work and talk about how we could rearrange or maybe push some things back so that you may take advantage of this opportunity? There are a number of things as a leader that you can do to show your staff that you are interested in their professional development, that you want to support their professional development as well. But at the end of the day, it is their decision. They're going to have to make that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions or thoughts around succession planning?
I also just wanted to jump in and say about this professional development stuff as well. Is like, as a person who has been presented with professional development opportunities by Angela, and then also with my team searching out different opportunities and presenting it to them, I think sometimes what happens as well is you start something and you realize it's not a match. And that is also time when making sure that a good relationship has been built up, making sure that there's good rapport is essential, because I can start something and realize, actually, this is not aligned with, it's not what I thought it was. You know what I mean? And being able to then say, I don't know if this is actually the best way to spend my time. I've made a mistake, right? Because I think those things are helpful too. Because Angela, I think you were mentioning a little bit about people maybe starting professional development and not seeing it all the way through. And it could be that it's not what they thought it would have been.
Yeah. And I think it's important to be able to name, like some goals. Sometimes that's hard, right? If someone were to ask me right now, what are your professional development goals over the next 3 to 5 years? I don't know that I could immediately say, this is exactly what I want to do, right? Sometimes it's a matter of having multiple conversations and even probing in other spaces. Perhaps there's a project, right, that someone on your staff is doing, and you check in midpoints around that project. And perhaps at the end of the project, you say, okay, like, how did it go? Let's reflect on it. Let's talk about it. Were there growth areas there? Were there things that surprised you around your own leadership in this space? What does that make you think about in terms of moving forward? Is that something that you would like to continue to explore? Is that something you never want to do again? Like using the work that is already in motion as an opportunity to probe on conversations about future leadership and growth areas is an easy way to have those conversations without directly just saying, what do you want to do? What is a growth area that you have? Some people can identify those very quickly. Some people cannot. And as leaders and as people who supervise others, it's really important for us to understand who it is that we're working with and then be able to kind of transition our own leadership style to meet those needs, to meet them where they're at, to get them to start understanding or to start exploring some of those things. It's not a conversation that's going to happen overnight. It's not a conversation that could even happen in just like 1 or 2, one-on-ones. It's a conversation, like I said, which is why it's important to just create it as a part of your one-on-one cadence, is that it's a conversation that happens over time. And as you build more relationship with folks, it becomes easier, to Anna's point, for someone to say, hey, I signed up for this thing. It was a little expensive. It's actually not at all what I thought it was, and I really don't want to do it anymore. Right? That's a level of vulnerability. And talking about, you know, our futures, the future that we have within an organization, the future that we have outside of the organization, that's a really vulnerable space for someone to be in, especially if you pay their check, you know, just being completely transparent. And so you have to create this space for folks to feel like they can come to you and have an open, honest conversation, that this is something that you're working on with them, and that it's not something that happens in the immediate, but it's something that happens over time. Any other thoughts or questions?
Good morning, this is Maria.
Hi, Maria. It's been so long. It's good to hear your voice.
Thank you, the same. I was wondering if there was a way to connect us with someone that has gone through that transition, kind of having that conversation with them, more kind of a one-on-one or 2-to-1, you know, kind of a small group.
Yeah, I think we can think about some folks. Yeah, I think we can come up with a list of some folks and maybe ask them.
And also, I don't know if there's like a guide, or maybe we could use this presentation as a guide to create a document.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Anna's going to be sending it out to everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was even thinking about like what a transition plan looks like. And like I feel comfortable sharing my transition plan from when I went on parental leave, because I
Right.
feel like
Yeah.
even something like that could be a really good base for what you then build on for like the actual leave, right? Being able to see, because I mapped out month by month, like what I'm anticipating happening, and therefore who needs to be in what meetings for what. So that's something I feel comfortable sharing as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to share that as well.
I think the other part that is really difficult, and it takes time, is how to pass on the relationships. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's like a guide for that, like how to make that happen.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. You can't necessarily pass on a relationship, right? You can pass on the contact, but a relationship is tricky. So when Anna and I both went on, Anna and I both had babies back to back. And so when both of us went on leave, it was really important for us to be able to transition relationships and obviously projects, as I mentioned earlier. And we're happy to share the document that follows, you know, kind of some of the steps that I shared in terms of like identifying your key tasks and your responsibilities, who's involved, who needs to be involved, and timelines around that. But when it came to being able to transition some of those projects to somebody else with a relationship, you know, it's as simple as like sending an email and maybe setting up a coffee. Hey, I'm going to be transitioning, you know, whether it's temporarily, right? Some folks go on sabbatical now. Some people have babies. Some people, you know, have medical leaves or leave forever, right? Being able to say, hey, Maria, I'm connecting you with so-and-so. I will be gone effective blah blah blah. Give as many or little details as you want to. This person is going to be taking over this project. It would be great for you all to set up some time to meet, have a coffee, and then that person can share a little bit about like what that transition plan looks like. I will be taking over XYZ plan. Here's what I'm thinking. It allows for them to take over the relationship, for there to be, you know, you making that connection allows for them to then take it on to meet that person, to go out to coffee, maybe have a Zoom, depending on how they want to do that, to just set the stage. And also to be able to share some of the details of what will happen moving forward, so that again, this transition of relationship creates a trust. If you have a project going on and someone's leaving in the middle of your project, there's an immediate like, oh no, what's going to happen to the project? But then if someone else is introduced and you give that person the opportunity to say, this is how I'm going to take this over, there's an opportunity for there to be trust and to calm some of the potential anxieties around what may happen with that. So I don't know if there's necessarily a real good formula, but I think utilizing your relationship to whoever it is that you're transitioning the relationship to is key, and making sure that the new person that's taking it over is set up for success. Any other thoughts or questions before we wrap up? Well, thank you so much for coming and joining today. Anna and I are happy to share our own transition plans. And so you'll know it's what exactly we used while we were out. Thank you so much. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You have, I'm pretty sure, both of our email addresses. But it was really good to share and to talk with you all today.